All right, everybody, welcome back. This is an episode that I've been looking forward to for a very, very long time. Um, we've been talking about for a very long time, Dr. Carissa Baker and I. But at various times, it's taken so long to happen. One, because I wanted to try to educate myself more on the Society of Explorers and Adventurers. And then also we did have some bad luck, maybe some dealing with curses like happens in SEA. The last few weeks trying to get this meeting going. So we're finally here. We are talking about the Society of Explorers and Adventurers. And just for a brief overview, uh, Dr. Baker will get into it a lot more. But a brief overview is it is a way to connect stories from the parks and now going out of the parks as well. They've shown up they've shown up in written literature, in movies. I know there's some in comics, the Marvel comics about the attractions. A way to link different attractions and stories from around the parks, around the world, and even in the Disney cruise lines. And so it's a really, really fun way when we talk about the company's ability to engage with fans and really kind of cross promote. If you're going to Walt Disney World, and you want to know more about this character, you need to go to Shanghai, or you need to go to Tokyo, or maybe even Paris. And so it's really, really fun way to kind of get into all that. So at this point, um, Dr. Baker, she's back for the third time. Welcome back. And first of all, well, give us, for people who haven't listened to your previous ones, give us the quick rundown of your fandom, where you are, um, everything like that.
Yeah, so happy to be back for the third time. Like, how cool is that? So I guess I'm a real friend of the show for sure. Yeah, I'm Dr. Carissa Baker. I'm an assistant professor of theme park and attraction management at the University of Central Florida. And I have a background in working in theme parks operations generally, and then also in being a theme park scholar. And my kind of main focus when it comes to research is narrative. And so I've studied theme park storytelling. I've done creative consulting on theme park storytelling, did my whole dissertation on that, and still do research on that. So the Society of Explorers and Adventurers, or SEA, which I think we should call it that, or C, something easier than always saying Society of Explorers and Adventurers. But this is very exciting to me because I love this idea of narrative threads that are kind of weaving all around the world within Disney's properties.
Yeah, and it's just it's so fun. It's so cool. So the first thing, tell us, what is SEA?
Yeah, so I mean, I would call it like a vast narrative or an interconnected narrative, where essentially you have a group of societies of in a society specifically of explorers and adventurers. And this is generally Victorian age. So if you look at most of the dating of the attractions that we're talking about, it is Victorian age. But as you said, stuff like the book series, which there is a book series I'm sure you'll ask about, which is set in contemporary times. So it kind of spans that. And if you actually go to the thing that is behind me, which is the fortress explorations at Tokyo Disney Sea, really the first instance of this within a Disney park, this goes all the way back to Magellan and such. So back to like the 1500s and things. So this group, they really enjoy exploring. They're interested in discerning new knowledge, scientific explorations, and just looking at the world, trying to discover as much as they can of it. But there is a really interesting tension in this group that I'm sure you may ask about, between being kind of benevolent during these exploratory adventures versus being kind of opportunistic. And there's kind of a fascinating tension that the Imagineers have created between the different types of explorers in this organization.
And so let's talk a little bit about the history of, there's the story history, the written story history, and you can go to um you can go onto the Disney Wiki page and you can read about SEA. And it goes back. It talks about starting in the 1538 or something like that. And it's this really cool page that talks about your all the characters that are involved in the lineup, the different connections that they have, even some of the associated characters. I thought it was so interesting that like Indiana Jones is mentioned in there. I can't remember the who Dwayne Johnson played in the Jungle Cruise movie, but he's mentioned in there as like maybe an associated character. Jock Lindsay is like a member now, from the first Indiana Jones movie. So there's the story, but then there's also kind of the reality of it from the company's perspective. Um, let's talk a little bit about those. Before we started recording, um, I said I had heard that one of the first instances or first idea of this from the company perspective was when Paradise Pleasure Island, sorry, Pleasure Island was being developed in Florida to keep people on Walt Disney World's property after the parks closed. And I believe it was Joe Rohde who had the idea for the Adventurers Club. Um, from a business perspective, first, is that where it started, or did it start before that as well?
Yeah, so from the Disney company perspective, I say there's kind of two inspirational routes into the SCA. One is the Disney company's perspective, and then there's just the reality of the world and the real exploration societies and kind of isolated clubs that existed. But we'll start with the Disney company stuff. Absolutely, Joe Rohde, one of his first, he's really well known, former Imagineer who did, Disney's Animal Kingdom, was kind of the key creative on that project. But this was one of his earlier projects, was the Adventurers Club, which lasted quite a while and is still very fondly remembered, I would say, by fans. And this was absolutely the first instance of it at Disney. And at the time, they didn't necessarily know it was going to become the SEA. It wasn't connected to that, but it was still definitely an explorers club. It was set a little bit later than most of the SEA stuff, which tends to be Victorian. And then what's also kind of interesting is if you look at even how did the Adventurers Club get started, they kind of based it on a couple of things. So they based it partially on, very interesting to note, the Magic Castle, which is this kind of secretive society and building that's still there in Los Angeles, where I'm from. It was actually down the street from my high school, so that's like a thing that's a strange thing to note. But so this is the Magic Castle. You would go there. You can only get in there if you're invited, and then you can watch magic shows, essentially, like that. And there's a lot of similarity in terms of some of the architectural stylings, and then again, this idea of this kind of secret hideaway for people in this society. So that was kind of one of the inspirations for the Adventurers Club. But then the kind of wider inspiration is that during the actual Victorian era, there were a lot of clubs like this. So there was the Royal Society, where you would have scientists who would go out in the world. They would explore, they would find things, they would learn things, and then they would come back and do sometimes public audiences and explain things. But sometimes they would be in these kinds of organizations. And there's an organization like this that Mark Twain was in, for instance. And then very interesting when you look at the Explorers Club, because we're going to hear that a couple of times today. Explorers Club restaurant, for instance, at Hong Kong Disneyland. But there is a real Explorers Club that is in fact still there in New York. And it started, I actually wrote it down somewhere, in 1904, so during the Victorian era. And it was very much like a private club, very elite group of people. And today they still fund science and expeditions and things like that. So it's a lot more contemporary now. It's a lot more inclusive in terms of who their membership is. but those kinds of clubs have a history. And so you kind of see that history coming into this adventurers club in Pleasure Island. And we do know that the person who kind of bought the land for in the backstory for Pleasure Island, which is Adam Merriweather Pleasure, that he was a member of the SCA. So we now know that, but we didn't know that back when Pleasure Island was still open.
And I just keep going back to, like, it reminds me of when Disney Springs actually was changed to Disney Springs from downtown Disney. And like the backstory that they built around, like, why does Disney Springs exist? What was it before it was this shopping center? And one of the most fun things to me about what Disney does is the storytelling. And you know, every attraction, or almost every attraction, has a story that a lot of people visiting the parks don't see. Unless you don't realize that there is a full backstory to uh, the things you're seeing in the queue at the Jungle Cruise, the things you're seeing at Big Thunder Mountain. They built a story around everything, not just attractions. They built stories just, around like the placement of objects in the parks. And that's fascinating to me. And it's also one of those things that, as when you write something, there part of you wants a lot of people to know it, wants to wants a lot of people to know that you did this and appreciate this and appreciate it, that you did it. And a lot of this writing goes without kind of, public fanfare. Um, and so I see SEA as a way to kind of introduce more and more fans and people who attend the parks to those types of stories. We've often talked about how Disney exists on multiple levels as far as fandom. You could be someone who's going for the first or second time, and you could see all the things in Disney and be amazed by it, because there are amazing things that they do in that park. If you are someone who has been 50 times, 100 times, 1,000, whatever, you can go deeper and you can see everything. You can see a lot more at the parks. And so SEA to me kind of exists as almost an escalator to get somebody from who has maybe been a few times, to build them up to that type of fandom, that level of fandom, where they are wanting to keep up with, the stories and keep up with the attractions and everything. Um, that's the way I see it. How do you see the kind of interconnected storytelling aspect of all of this?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I am one of those people that you are talking about. So, and I just want to kind of tell a story and then I'll answer this question. So, behind me in my image is this Fortress Explorations, which is essentially like a walkthrough attraction at Tokyo Disney Sea, but it's very elaborate. So there's multiple rooms. There's actually like an interactive quest where you can do 4 different paths and in each of these paths, you become a member of the SEA at the end. So very, very cool. And the interesting thing is, I would say all the little connections between each of the parks, this is not something that's very obvious. But Fortress Explorations, it's extremely obvious. And so I don't know if can I share my screen? Is that something we could do? We've never tried this before, but
Uh, there we go. You should be able to now.
all right. So boom, and then there it is. Can you see this picture?
The plaque.
Yeah, so this is how I personally found out about the SEA. So it was just a plaque. it's not even, particularly openly displayed. It's just kind of on the side of this area within the Fortress Explorations. And it has, as you see, the SCA logo, which has now become pretty popular. And it says, "We the Society of the or we the members of the Society of Explorers and Adventurers herewith establish Explorers Landing in order to promote the sharing of nautical and scientific knowledge for world exploration." This was the first time that I ever heard of this. And then I wanted to know, kind of what on earth is this?
Mhm.
This is something that, I don't necessarily know what that is. And I wanted to explore more and more. And when you go through the Fortress Explorations, there's a map, and then it kind of tells you about each of the main things that this SEA actually want, like what they seek. So they have, I could just, read from it here, but basically it talks about the adventurous spirit, and the romantic allure of the
Mhm.
heavens above, and the scientific discoveries, as well as the, scientific innovations and things like that. So this is given out to you as a guest. So this is something that I was so excited about. And this was years upon years ago when I first went to Tokyo Disney Sea. And it absolutely made me one of those fans. Now I want to know all the little intricate connections. I want to figure out how they all connect to one another. And every time I go to a new attraction that kind of seems exploration-y, then I say, I wonder if this is somehow connected to the SEA.
Yeah.
So I love it. I think it's such a great idea, and it really does, because there are some guests who will go one time to Walt Disney World and that's all they'll ever do. And this is probably not something as much for those kind of one-time fans. But the people like me who they want, presumably guests to come back several times over the years, and maybe even if they have the ability to go to several different properties, this is really starting to all connect it to, to those guests. And I also just think that guests, that there's a lot of kind of theory behind this. One of them is this, Mattel's concept of the forensic fans. There's certain fans that just want to kind of dig
Mhm.
deeper. There's a lot of discussion you may have heard, I'm sure, in design and other things, of this idea, the swimmers, the waiters, and the divers, this kind of thing, different levels of participation that people want. And those who are going to be those divers who want to dig deep into the fandom and to really understand everything, it's just fun.
Yeah. Um, so we talked about kind of from the company's perspective. Now let's get into the written or the narrative history of SEA. And maybe I'll link the Disney Wiki page, so that people can read more about it themselves. Because I thought about, like, um, I sort of thought about in the introduction reading this off the Disney Wiki page and giving Disney Wiki the credit for it. The background, it would probably take me 5 minutes to read it. And I'm not sure that is the most interesting thing for people to hear me talking for 5 minutes. But let's let's talk about kind of the written or the narrative of this history. It says it was started August 12th, 1538 in Porto Paradiso, Italy. Um, Take it from there. Kind of walk us through what started it, what's the purpose of it. You mentioned the purpose of it and kind of their four pillars of it. And then let's get into the character lineup
Yeah.
of the SEA and their ties to different parks and different attractions in the parks. And even, as I said, on Disney Cruise Line, there's an attraction at Typhoon Lagoon that is tied to a character as well. So go ahead and get into all of that, please.
Yeah, and if you don't mind, since you mentioned that, I am going to share, if this whole technology thing works. So this is precisely what it is that you are handed. So this is kind of your first introduction into this, again, at the Fortress Exploration. And they're explaining how, you're going to witness the firsthand progression of our explorations and research. And then this is what I said, the 4 pillars: adventure, romance, discovery, innovation. So, and each of these connect to the 4 quests that you can go on in what's called the Leonardo Challenge, which is an interactive quest. So again, showing you the differing levels of what they give their guests, because some guests are just going to walk by this stuff and say, cool. So if you see the Chamber of Planets, that's what's behind me in my background here. Some guests are going to say that. Some guests are going to take one of these brochures. I certainly still have my brochure, and they're gonna maybe be interested in it. Some will actually do the 4 different quests within the Leonardo Challenge. And then some guests are just going to dive completely deep as possible. And then, like you said, want to know all the members that have ever been involved. But the interesting thing that we find out in the Fortress Explorations, which is, again, the very first instance of the SEA, so kind of amazing that it's so fleshed out, even compared to, I would say, contemporary instances of it. So that's when we find out exactly who founded it. So it was founded by Leonardo da Vinci himself. How exciting. And you see one of his flying contraptions within the Fortress Explorations. It was also founded by Marco Polo. And so you see a lot about navigation and sea, and this makes sense also when you think about the SEAC, and this was created at Disney Sea. So it's kind of weirdly all connected. And then the final founding member was Ferdinand Magellan. And this is, again, another connection immediately, because right there next to Fortress Explorations is the Magellan's Restaurant. And this is just, I mean, one of the most beautiful restaurants ever. And this is their first meeting room. So this is kind of from the beginning where it is that you saw members starting to meet. And throughout time, you're getting lots of explorers, lots of adventurers, but we don't know most of their names. And the great majority of the ones that we know their names are, again, from that Victorian period. But what that does tell me is that there are so many people that they could add to this in the future if they wanted to, because essentially in that period from the 1500s to mostly the late 1800s, early 1900s, we don't have a lot of information about who is between those spots. So really, really interesting to find that out. And then the other kind of big one that you may have heard of was then the Tower of Terror. So when we're kind of looking at it with Disney's history, we first saw Fortress Explorations, then we saw Magellan's Restaurant. So that was, I think, 2001 was when those both came out. And then the Leonardo Challenge came out several years later, but it was using the same spot. It was just giving you a more explicit way to explore that. And then the very next one that we saw was Tower of Terror. As we talked about on a future or past episode, yeah, you could see the curse, right? You're starting to see it, even fumbling the words. That's what's happening. So then we see the Tower of Terror, which again didn't really connect with that IP in Japan, not really something that they knew much about. So they decided to continue the SEA theme over into that. And that is where we meet Harrison Hightower. And Harrison Hightower is quite an interesting character because, number one, he's obviously Joe Rohde. He looks exactly like Joe Rohde. So that's kind of an interesting one. But then it also very much shows you this kind of journey where he goes from place to place and he gathers knowledge, but also gathers artifacts. But we can tell right away that he's not going to be one of the good guys because he's very disrespectful. It's obvious that a lot of this is kind of based on a profit motive and things like that. You do also have this connected to Raging Spirits, which is a roller coaster that's in the same park, because there's kind of like an Easter egg in the queue for Tower of Terror. So you see that a lot of the things we find out about SEA are through Easter eggs in queues. So that's when we see also that he's so disrespectful to this artifact of this now very famous kind of villain-like character called Shiriki Utundu, who is the idol in Tower of Terror. And he actually puts out his cigarette on this idol. And so I feel like it's probably okay to give spoilers for Tower of Terror at this point.
Yeah.
You're gonna fall and you're gonna drop, right? So that's gonna happen. And it's because Harrison Hightower has angered this idol character. And it's so fascinating because this is essentially the villain until you realize that Harrison Hightower is the villain. You know, he was the one who he kind of did not honor his
Yeah.
pledge. We find out through a lot of kind of intricate details that other people don't respect Harrison Hightower's kind of connection to these other cultures and these artifacts. So that's kind of interesting. And then the next instance of the SEA that we find out about was Lord Henry Mystic, and this is Mystic Manor, what I think is one of the best attractions in the entire world at Hong Kong Disneyland. And he is almost the antithesis of Harrison Hightower. So they're both in SEA, they're both explorers, they both go and chart new territory and things like that. But the idea behind Mystic is that he does respect these artifacts. And so it's a very different kind of ending because you have this music box that they get from Bali, and it has he's got this very cute monkey companion named Albert, who is told he should never go near the music box, but he's curious monkey, so he's going to open up the music box. It's got this kind of magic dust or something that illuminates everything, and that makes everything animated essentially. So everything from weapons to things. So this is happening, and in the end, it doesn't have a kind of negative ending because of his kind of respect in the past for these cultures. And you actually see him, he's shaking hands with different cultures and things like that. Very different from Harrison Hightower. But those are kind of what we would consider our two big SEA attractions, but we still haven't left Asia yet, if you've noticed. So it took a long time. So that opened in 2013. Mystic Point Land, Lord Henry Mystic, Mystic Manor, the Explorers Cub restaurant, which shows all the different places he's visited. But it finally comes to the United States with a redo of the queue of Big Thunder Mountain Railroad, also in 2013, of Magic Kingdom specifically. And this is kind of connecting to some of the other things. So there we see Barnabas Bullion, who is kind of like this landowner, mine owner. And how crazy is this? Because he looks exactly like Tony Baxter. And then we start seeing kind of little bits of his story. And then he also connects to Jason Chandler, who would become one of the SEA leaders. But you would only know these things if you follow these tiny little crumbs in the queue and go and read the Marvel Comics Big Thunder Mountain Railroad comic book. So that's how it connects. Magic Kingdom got more stuff because we also have the very long-winded name, to the point I had to write it down, Jungle Navigation Company Limited Skipper Canteen. So this is a restaurant in Adventureland, and it's really great, connects with the Jungle Cruise. And that's when we realized that Dr. Albert Falls, who we've been hearing about for ages, was an SEA member. He has a granddaughter, I believe it is, Alberta Falls, who's the one who kind of commissioned this restaurant, and it does have a secret SEA meeting room. So again, really, if you're a regular guest at this restaurant, it's kind of cool because if you want to go into the SEA room, there's like a bookshelf, and you have to go behind the bookshelf to get to the secret SEA meeting room. So again, just really, really cool connections. There's probably a connection most of your students will not have heard of, which is in 2015, Hong Kong Disneyland actually has a pretty cool Halloween event. And they don't do it every year or anything, but they did for a while. And they had one called the Jungle River Cruise Curse of the Emerald Trinity. And this was another just really, really cool thing. This is Professor Garrett Reed, very similar to Harrison Hightower, kind of gets kicked out of the SEA, and then kind of comes back, and you see what happens if you go on that. So again, kind of going back to Asia, you mentioned Mary Oceaneer because she's the one who ends up being connected to Misadventure Falls at Typhoon Lagoon in 2017. But a year before that, they had on the Disney Cruise Line opened Oceaneer Lab. And so that's again kind of connecting to her. And then a couple of more recent ones, we have the Tropical Hideaway Restaurant, which is really cool at Disneyland. I don't know if you checked that one out right next to Tiki
Mm.
Room. And this was fun because it has a bunch of different oars all in a row, and it kind of shows you which river, which member of the SEA kind of originally charted. And
Wait,
there's a
with
bunch that we don't know about.
real quick, was that is that an indoor restaurant or it's at Disneyland? It is not where you go to get the Dole Whip, right?
Yeah, it's right outside where you go to get the Dole Whip. So you could get the
Okay.
Dole Whip from the like the window in front, or you can actually go to the restaurant right next to the Tiki Room.
So, well, because and but is the rest like because we spent a lot of time. We went multiple times right beside the Tiki Room. I can't remember what it was called, but it was an outdoor place where like you go and you actually like go up to the counter to get the Dole Whips, but then you sit outside. We were, and I can't remember what it was called. So that's probably not the restaurant you're talking about, right?
It probably is. And this
Okay.
is again, you if you are sitting outside the tiki room eating a or having a delicious Dole Whip, then you probably went to this restaurant, but you wouldn't necessarily
Yeah.
notice this because it's just decor, and the decor has all of these oars listed in a row, and it's got Mystic and Hightower and all the ones that I just mentioned, but then also a couple that we still don't know who they are. So that was kind of the next SEA one. And then just a couple more. We have the Soarin' Fantastic Flight. So this is basically Soarin' around the world like the other parks have, but when Disney Sea put in theirs, they really built upon this story of Camelia Falco, who's the first female who was ever inducted into the SEA, and kind of her travels, and she has this thing called the Museum of Fantastic Flight. So we get her in that one. The most recent thing that I saw in an attraction was actually very recently because I just went to Disneyland and saw the Adventureland Treehouse, which only opened last year, and
Hmm.
right in the middle. I mean, this I would almost say that yeah, you're going to see guests who aren't going to know what that necessarily means, but it was still pretty out in the open that this was connected to the SEA. There was an SEA book, which had the entire membership list of the SEA throughout the years, which I'm sure every fan would love to grab a copy of that book. I would guess there's nothing inside, but I was like, oh, I really want that book. It's got all the membership listed. So those are kind of all the big ones, but then there's been tons of small ones. Like you mentioned, Jock Lindsay. So Jock Lindsay has his hangar bar in Disney Springs, which has an SEA logo right on the menu. I'm still wondering because at Disneyland Paris, you have Colonel Hottie's restaurant and Cafe Hyperion, which have SEA logos, but you're not really sure how connected they are. We do have at Boardwalk, we have the Abracadabra. I always have trouble saying that one, which has some of the fezzes of different SEA members over the years. And then Trader Sam's Bar, which is something you can see at Disneyland, as well as Polynesian, which connect to it. So there's those ones I would say are those more kind of little crumbs. Whereas
Hmm.
the attraction ones, they're right out in the open. And I would say that it would be impossible to not see the connection to it if you went on, especially Tower of Terror and Mystic Manor. So that was a lot, but there was a
Yeah.
whole bunch of members there. And,
Well,
and you asked the question.
well, so I'm looking at the wiki page, and Frank Wolf is the skipper from Jungle Navigation Company, and that's who Dwayne Johnson played in the movie Jungle Cruise. But also, this links I'm gonna say his name incorrectly, Captain Bree from 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then there are two animated characters who are included and I say animated because like a lot of these characters, yes, you can tell that they're either in paintings or they're drawn or something like that. But Mickey and Minnie Mouse are are, you know, they both have had the SEA crest stamped on their passports.
Mhm.
And so they're associated members or believed to be members.
Right, right. And I
And
just what you're saying is this is what's so great about this lore is people
yeah.
trying to piece this together.
And so what's so cool about all of this is you really like what is very meta to me about all of this. SEA exists because of the storylines within the story of SEA, people trying to piece all of this information together for around the world to discover new things, to honor new things, or honor the natural world outside of the story. As us, we as consumers, when we are trying to piece all of this together, we essentially are following the path of what the SEA members within the story would follow, which I think is so cool. And I think it's fascinating that like there actually is a place where you can go and you are inducted as a member of SEA at the end of all of that. That's so fascinating to me. And I think, you know, it's also in the era of IP in the parks. And as I've said this many, many times, I even did a whole episode with Ryan Pagella about IP in the parks and some of the best IP in the parks. Intellectual property in the parks has always been there. When Disneyland opened, it was full of intellectual property. That's why Disneyland was built. That's why all of these parks are built. So I always feel the need to say that because, you know, people especially will say there's where's the original stuff? You know, now it's just like from movies and
Mhm.
it's
Mhm.
from the shows and everything that we're seeing. But this is one of those that starts out as an original concept and has expanded to now they are including people from movies. And what's so interesting to me is you look at one in particular, Jock Lindsay. He has what, like a 3 or 4 minute role in Temple of Doom. I'm sorry, no, in Raiders of the Lost Ark. And that's it. But and he comes from an acquired property that Disney did not produce that. Lucasfilm produced that. He was that, you know, that property was acquired when Disney purchased Lucasfilm. So that is so interesting to me that it's like finding these bits of narrative connections where they could tell this broader story is so fascinating. I did have one question specific to like Tower of Terror. Is the Tower of Terror in Disney's Hollywood Studios, is that connected? Or is it just like, so if there are multiple attractions, are all the attractions connected or is just one specific attraction connected?
Mhm. Well, I should say that as a fan of this lore, I think we can never rule anything completely out. But as of today, I haven't heard any connection between that one and there are three Tower of Terrors that are it like there's the Twilight Zone type,
Mhm.
there's the Guardians of the Galaxy type, and then there's this third one, which is the one at Disney Sea, which is very overtly about the SEA and you know, connects very strongly to all the rest of the lore. So I think that's the only one, but I honestly I don't know because you even think about the Guardians of the Galaxy version, which is phenomenal, the Mission Breakout, and this is all about a kind of a not great collector, right? Who's kind of exploiting, you know, in some cases creatures and peoples to collect the things that he wants to collect. This is Tivon, if you remember that. So I don't know. I think it kind of it connects, if maybe not explicitly to the SEA. It still has kind of a similar vibe of
Mhm.
a big bad collector who's maybe not doing the most ethical practices, we'll say.
So yeah, I'm trying to read about Harrison Hightower, and it talks about in 1899 what, you know, he stole the god idol Shiriki Utundu, when he returned to New York City, he threw a New Year's Eve party in the Hotel Hightower, um, mem with many members of the society in attendance to celebrate his robbery. That night, Hightower was killed by Shariki, and then he's remained a ghost in there. So yeah, like the wiki page doesn't mention connection to Disney's Hollywood Studios. I always thought, just kind of surface level knowledge about SEA, that it was that the Hollywood Hotel was connected to it. I always thought Harrison Hightower owned that as well.
Hmm.
And I know there's kind of a different story that connects the Hollywood Tower or the Hollywood Hotel to the Rock and Roller Coaster ride. I know like that connects within the story of Disney's Hollywood Studios. Um, but yeah, I didn't know whether, if there was one, if there are multiple attractions that are the same or similar, if they all connect or not. So then most of most of the people in the class, if they've been to a park, they have been to Walt Disney World. Each semester when I ask, it's about up to 50%. Usually it's about 30% or 40% that have been to a Disney park. And because of where we are located in Memphis, Tennessee, most people, if they've been to a park, they've been to Walt Disney World. What are, just for anybody who wants to know and wants to seek these out, what are some quick kind of uh, tidbits or quick hits on where they can see SEA connections at Walt Disney World?
Yeah, so I'd say the most obvious one for sure is go to Magic Kingdom, go on the Jungle Cruise because kind of the original purveyor of this attraction was a member. You can dine at the Jungle Cruise Skipper Canteen just because that's also connected. It's got a secret SEA room. Also has really good cuisine from around the world, so it's again kind of connecting to that exploration theme. And then Big Thunder Mountain, check out that queue because it has, and you, one of the things that's strange is some of these great things that you see in theme park queues only really work if there's a line. So if
Hmm.
you're going really quickly through there, you might completely
Yeah.
miss this letter to Barnabas Bullion from Jason Chandler that's in the queue. You might completely miss that. So all I will say is so many of these are in the small details, so just look in the small details. And then I would definitely, if you happen to be visiting Typhoon Lagoon, I would go on Misadventure Falls, which is already a cool ride. It's got an animatronic parrot. So
Mm.
that's just cool anyway. And it's again another where they blatantly put the SEA logo right there. So some of these logos are kind of hidden. You would never necessarily notice them otherwise. So like in the UK pavilion of Epcot, there's like a tiny little SEA logo hidden in the books. Whereas stuff like Misadventure Falls, it's like, boom, this is an
Hmm.
SEA attraction. But I definitely think Walt Disney World, other than Tokyo Disney Sea, is where a lot of the connections are.
So, um, the next I want to talk about is the company has at various points taken these stories or the story of SEA outside of the parks. As I said, they've started being connected in movies, or actually, I should say they've started taking characters from movies and making them members of SEA. But you mentioned the Marvel comic about Big Thunder Mountain Railroad. You can see that. There are other instances where there are stories being written about this. One in particular that is an established SEA story, and it's the first of multiple. It's the going to be the first in a series. One that I sent you also that I don't think is specifically tied to SEA, but kind of follows a lot of the storylines, and they may reference a few in there. I don't know. Tales from Adventureland by John Lethcoat. Have you ever read any of those?
Yeah, so all the ones you've named I've read. There are actually two in the series of the SEA one. So if you wanted me to talk about both of them, I can.
And so first on Tales from Adventureland, um, that is not an established SEA series, is it? But it's been a while since I read them. Do they make any mention of SEA members, or is it just kind of because of the adventures that they go on, it kind of puts you in that mindset?
Yeah, it has been so many years since I've read those. I have all three books, but I don't remember if they mentioned them by name, but I do remember that it's the Jess, like the Jungle Exploration
Hmm.
Society.
Yeah.
And I heard a rumor, though I cannot, confirm. I obviously wasn't there, but I heard that Disney specifically told him not to use
Oh, okay.
SEA because they didn't know where they were going with that property yet. So it's something different.
Yeah.
And this, I wanted to connect this because this has been seen before. So, like when you had the Adventure Trading Company and the Tales from Frontierland, these kind of interactive games that they did as playtests at Disneyland, there was also kind of an exploration connection, but it wasn't the SEA. And I actually, I don't know if I've told you about it, but at Shanghai Disneyland, they have a thing called Camp Discovery, and it's really cool because it's basically a ropes course, but at a Disney theme park, and it's massive, and
Hmm.
it has all of this kind of lore that connects to it, and it's not SEA. So it's the is it the League of Explorers? So let me look at the picture. I actually found my picture from my visit, so I could talk about this one today. So this is a another like Disney exploration thing. So I'm gonna share the pic really quick. And if you could see, yeah, it's the League of Adventures. That's what it is.
Hmm.
So the League of Adventures, and the first of all, again, connecting to other attractions, they have a like a dirigible here called the New Horizons, which
Mm, yeah.
connecting that. But then it talks about over on the left here, you see that it says Lost Temple Found, and then this is a connection to the Temple of the Crystal Skull in
Hmm.
Tokyo Disney Sea. And then they also have, a little bit of a connection here to like Everest and things like that. So they're connecting it, but it's not the SEA. This club is set a little bit later, so I think it's 1920s, 1930s. But this fascinates me that in the era, because Shanghai opened in 2016, so in the era of SEA with all these connected SEA attractions, that now we're trying to wonder who are the League of Adventurers?
Yeah.
And are they connected to the SEA? Do their members know each other? And there's all of these different members of the League of Adventurers. One of the members' names I thought was so clever. It's Mariana Trench. So I just thought that was
Yeah.
so funny. So, but this is a whole different group
Yeah.
from the SEA. So that one really interests me. Like, is this Jungle Explorer Society from those Adventureland books? Is that somehow connected? Do they know each other? Is this League of Adventures, separate but connected? Do they know each other? So now I'm thinking, wow, there's so many exploration societies, and it's something that clearly is really resonating with guests if they're continuing to create so many different offshoots.
Yeah. Yeah. And you know what is, I mean, kind of the question I was building to, um, and I'll try to hold off on that. But there was a question I was building to, so if I don't ask it, please remind me. Um, the books, there are two now. As you pointed out, excuse me, I've read the first one or listened to the first one on Audible, I should say, that are about the SEA that are published by Disney. The first one's called Shinji Takahashi and the Mark of the Coatl. And that does get into like you said, like it's more contemporary time. This teenager realizing like his descendants come from, where his descendants are, or I guess he is a descendant of someone who is a member of the SEA. Um, Talk a little bit about those. books. And while you're doing that, I'm also, because I forgot, I'm gonna try to look up to see if the Audible of the second book is available now.
Mhm.
So I can
Right.
listen to that.
Yeah, yes, and I just read that one earlier this year, so that one was really recent. I think it was Into the Storm or something like that. But so yeah, that's an interesting book series because it is the first time when Disney has given that kind of explicit go ahead to have books that are based in this universe. And I wasn't sure how they were going to do this. I was, because of my literary background, very much hoping that we would get kind of like Jules Verne-esque Victorian era, discussions of those older members, but instead it's completely set in the contemporary times. In the most recent one, because I remember that one better, there's actual a character in that one called Phoebe Mystic, and it's kind of hysterical because they continuously mention the fact that her family knows all about curses, like that one time when
Hmm.
her great grandfather or what, however they're related, had that music box open. So it's a direct connection to Mystic Manor. And that one's pretty funny because Harrison Hightower, who we already know from that Tower of Terror ride that I mentioned, so he's obviously long gone, but it's the Hightower Corporation that's the baddies
Hmm.
in the entire series. So they're constantly kind of steal stuff and taking all the artifacts and disrespecting them. And but there's a very big difference now, which is that this is contemporary era, so they have very sophisticated
Hmm.
scientific instruments. But there is also magic. So there's very obviously magic in some of these older stories, and they've put magic in the new stories. So Shinji himself has this magic that he inherits from that kind of mythical beast. And so it's kind of interesting because on the one hand, it's very contemporary. So none of the characters we know are in it. They're all long gone, but a lot of their descendants are there.
Yeah.
And the book series is perhaps, I would say, even more explicit about why they exist. So they
Hmm.
definitely they're getting into danger all the time. But it's all about exploration. Like in the second book, they're trying to find the remnants of a lost society, and they really want to be able to tell the world that this lost society exists so that they're not forgotten. But they need to find the artifacts and the history behind this lost society. So it's kind of interesting that it's contemporary times, but it's basically the mission and vision of the SEA kind of remains even
Yeah.
even today. But I will say the series is a lot more like Percy Jackson.
Yeah.
It's not like Jules Verne or Victorian or something. I would love a more adult oriented series that would be kind of with that Victorian era. That would be fun too, to have a couple of different series.
Yeah. And I remember you and I have talked about that before as well. Having something that's more kind of adult oriented. And I have a confession. I actually, when I was looking up the second book, I have the second book and I have listened to the second book. And so it was a while. I remember Mark of the Coatl. When you were talking, I remember um the character Blair Mystic um from the second book. Um I obviously need to go back and re-listen to those so I can, especially that second one, so I can reacquaint myself with it. But there's a really interesting connection. I think you and I have talked before about did you ever read the Kingdom Keepers?
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I
So
I actually think this is fairly similar to that one.
and and I one time was talking to the author about that, and uh, one one of the questions I asked in the interview was, "Is there another Disney kind of series that if Disney asked you to write another series, what would you want?" And he mentioned that. He mentioned SEA. And he
Mhm.
said, they have somebody that has done an amazing job with it. And so, um, but there is a reference to um that to SEA, or I should say there's a reference to a character in one of the more recent books, the Inheritance series, the first Inheritance book. He mentions that his mother or grandmother used to be a member of a secret society of like somebody of explorers. And so again, like that could be, we don't know if that is SEA. We don't know if that is, the League of Explorers. We don't know who it is, but there are all these connections different places. And the reason I mentioned that also is, I mean, that's those books are published by Disney as well. And so, that would have to they would, agree to that presumably, to like kind of put that little tidbit in there, which is really, really fun, really, really
Yeah, but
interesting.
I have to say though, this thread is reminding me because all of these things have something in common, whether it's the Adventureland series, the Kingdom Keepers, the SCA, they all show you that people have a love for the theme parks,
Hmm.
and that they've inspired these imaginative works, and that people are engaged with this. And it always reminds me that we can't forget that the theme parks themselves are their own IP. And
Hmm.
I agree with you. I've heard a lot of kind of fan discussion about, is every single ride going to be an IP, this kind of thing. I mean, well, Disney creates IP, that's what they do. So
Yeah.
I kind of understand that. But then I also think, let's not forget about some of these original ways that they're connecting things together. I think the SEA is a park-based IP.
Hmm. And so the question or the discussion I was trying to build to, and I'm proud that I didn't give it away sooner, is how tell me how excited you would be if this were ever a series of movies or a Disney Plus series, where we had a Disney Plus series about the SEA. And I think it would be a series, it wouldn't be movies because
Yeah,
you could
well,
do so
they're
much more
both
with the
they are
series.
both under development as far as I know. I have not heard. So there was a movie under development and a Disney Plus series under development, both of them.
Oh,
And
really?
I have not heard that either of them have been canceled. So it's possible, of course, you know how it is in media development. So it's possible one or both of them will be canceled, but I have never heard that. I've always heard that the Disney Plus series is under development and that they were very seriously considering a movie. So I'm not sure what it is, but how excited I would be definitely is going to depend on what the content is.
Yeah.
And I know that some fans will be mixed about this because one of the things you can say, and I don't think you should, I don't know, like selfishly say nobody else should get it.
Yeah.
But part of you says, no, but like I found all those
Yeah.
connections and now all the regular guests are going to see it. So
Yeah.
it's kind of a funny little balance, but I think it in if it's popular with regular guests, they're going to put more of that content into the park. So I'm definitely on the side of give me more.
Yeah. And yeah, I can agree with that. It reminds me of, like if you go to, I mean, like the private meeting room at Skipper Canteen. I mean, it's one of those things that if you know about it and you want to know more about it, you can have fun with it and you can learn more about this topic. So that definitely makes sense to me. I definitely understand that. Because at one point I don't remember ever hearing about SEA. I remember hearing at one point there was a rumor that Kingdom Keeper series was going to be developed. This was when Disney Plus was new. There in that room that was scrapped. And now, with like the retrenchment and everything with cost saving, I don't know how much they would do with this. But I it's that balance and kind of it's that balance between fans like yourself who have done all of the work and you are like have have literally followed the steps as close as you can to be like a modern SEA member, if you will. Like you have done the work, you have followed the steps, you've looked in the queues, you've connected all of these things. And then, there's that balance with, hey, this is really cool IP. Let's let more people know about this. So maybe that will be the emphasis for them to go to other parks and go to the international parks and things like that. it's always that fun, like kind of back and forth with when you're talking about a media company, like, excuse me, such as Disney. So it's really, really cool. I think at this point, we've kind of covered everything that I have. What else, if anything, do you uh, do you think is important for people to know about the Society of Explorers and Adventurers before we get into some of the rapid questions?
Yeah, so I obviously, not to plug my own work, I do not mean to do that, but I did just write a chapter that looked at Disney's 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. And so I traced it from the novel and then to the movie by Disney, which was then created several Disney attractions. So there was a walkthrough at Disneyland, and then there was the ride, very similar to the submarine voyage ride that's still there at Magic Kingdom, which is now gone. And then you have the walkthrough of the Nautilus that's in Disneyland Paris. And then you have the entire Mysterious Island land that's at Tokyo Disney Sea, which has Journey to the Center of the Earth, as well as 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. And then I also kind of looked like, I don't remember if Cody, if you ever went on Timekeeper. But
I
you know, it
I
was
never
this
was
like
able
cool
to.
thing where H.G. Wells and Jules Verne got to meet at the expo, and it was really great. But this chapter, the reason I was so passionate about writing it is because one of the things that I felt is that Disney parks in general have always had a little bit of that flavor of exploration. So maybe now it's like really, really explicit, like they overtly put these things here. But I think that they've always been about that. Clearly, Walt Disney liked Jules Verne, and clearly, Walt Disney Imagineering loves Jules Verne, because over the years they've had all these amazing things. And I do still think that, you know, some of those attractions are. I mean, what are they about? There's a little bit of tension there, right? Because Captain Nemo, not always good, but then he's so intelligent in
Mhm.
whether it's the book, the movie, or in the attractions. It's all about exploring. It's all about, you know, what do we do when we find something, and it's just really, really great stuff. So I really think that the SCA kind of came about, at least, I mean, I don't know this for sure, but to me, it's almost like a long line of exploratory discovery. I remember, you know, Disneyland Paris's Tomorrowland is called Discoveryland, and
Mhm.
it was very much Jules Verne design rather than the kind of normal sterile white that we've gotten in other Tomorrowland. So I think that Disney Imagineers love this idea of exploration, and they're interested in the idea of discovery, and they do want for you to do, and for all of us to do what you just said, which is for you to explore, for you to find things. And those dedicated fans, I think they want to find all those little threads. So
Yeah.
that's kind of the first thing I wanted to say. The second thing, because I feel like most students are not going to have heard of that, but in the same way that I just mentioned that League of Adventures that I now really want to know more about, that's in Shanghai Disney, but that was self-created. I have seen several other instances of theme parks and entertainment copying this idea. And I don't know if it's copying Disney's idea or if it's copying the original Explorers Societies,
Mhm.
or I know there's been quite a few. For instance, there's a restaurant called Mr. Fogg's Society of Exploration, but this is like Phileas Fogg from Around the World in 80 Days
Mhm.
from Jules Verne. So there's so much Jules Verne in this concept. And then we have Europa Park, which is actually one of the
Mhm.
biggest parks in Europe. In Germany, they have the Adventure Club of Europe, so very similar. And if you go on their website, you can see like all the different members and what they've done. So very similar. And then Phantasialand, which is also a theme park in Germany, they have the Explorers Society. I had to write down these because
Mhm.
they're all so similar
Yeah.
in name. And again, so these ones I think are definitely copied from the SCA because they were directly from theme parks, but also much later than Disney's creation. But I just think there's something about this theme that stimulates our imagination.
Yeah.
We are interested in this time when the world was still undiscovered. And
Yeah.
so it's kind of cool.
Well, and if you think about it this way, when in the work a lot of people do, where they're researching, they're writing, they're teaching, a lot of what we as humans do is explore. And so when you when you think about it like that, and specifically, I mean, if you're in a position, or if you're in a job where you are writing and you're researching things, and like there's kind of a natural link there. But if you are in a job where you're tasked with figuring out how to solve an issue, or you have to link events together, to figure out something. There's such a it resonates so well with people. I think there's a reason why things like escape rooms are so popular. It's because of this idea. I think a lot of people, on some level, even though people may not want to openly admit it all the time, I think a lot of people like to think of themselves as somebody who's like exploring, and somebody, who's trying to figure things out. And so, I think that's why I think it's so cool that there actually is an attraction where you could, like, you leave and you are like an honorary member of SEA, which I think is so cool. Like, that's kind of goes along with, just this sense of adventure that people have, and that's really, really
And
fun.
I want one here. So if any Imagineers are listening, I will say Fortress Explorations is stunning and beautiful, but that quest is only in Japanese. And so it's, again, thinking about like their primary market is people who live in Japan. So I would love to see some kind of English language based quest somewhere, where I can go to the end and, do some kind of oath and become an SEA member, instead of right now, which is basically you solve these mysteries and you're an honorary
Mhm.
member. I want to be an actual member. So just saying that. The other thing I wanted to mention, now that I think about it, is they haven't shied away from some of the realities of this kind of situation of like the Explorers Club, especially during the Victorian era, because they completely discuss this idea of Camellia Falco. She's the one in the Soren version, at Tokyo Disney. They talk about her being the first female member, and I found it
Mhm.
really interesting when I was looking at the traditional Explorers Club. So the Explorers Club in New York, that one that opened in 1904, very secretive. They didn't allow women until, I wrote it down, 1981.
Okay. Yeah.
And the Ends of the Earth Club, which is the one that Mark Twain and many other artists were in, that one started in 1903, and there were no non-white members. So Disney's thinking about this. They are thinking
Yeah.
about, how can we discuss this? We don't want to get too political, but these theme parks are around the world, right? So they have to have at least some inclusion. So I'm fascinated that that was kind of considered when they were telling Camelia's story, that it actually wasn't just easy for her. She did have to kind of break the
Yeah.
the glass ceiling or whatever.
Yeah. And one I that's fascinating. And to go on to take your step, or your notion one step further, where you said if there are any Imagineers you would love to see an attraction here, because you want to be a member. Um, I have always thought it would be so cool to do some kind of consulting work with Disney and be called, like, an Imagineer in some way. I would absolutely love that. I think it would be so cool to, like, do something and be a SEA member. I would need to be educated more on it, before I
Chief
could fall into that group.
Exploration Officer.
Yes, yes, exactly.
I
Um,
mean, if Disney's hiring for that, you know how to reach me.
that's if and if you ever get into a situation where you have the ear of somebody to do something like that, hey, I am open for consulting. I'm open for membership in it. So that would be
Same. Oh, and by the
fantastic.
way, quick correction. Pleasure's name was Meriwether Adam Pleasure. I don't know why, but I always say Adam Meriwether Pleasure, but it's Meriwether Adam Pleasure.
Okay.
So
Okay.
I wouldn't want a fan to be upset by that. So
So I did have I wrote down four rapid questions. Um, One, well, actually, and I'll throw in a fifth. So you can explain these, you don't have to. The first question is they all have to deal with SEA. What is your favorite SEA character?
oh, no, see, that's actually really difficult. Oh my gosh. Okay, so I like a lot of them actually. But I'm going to say the pair of Lord Mystic and Albert because they're a pair. They're always seen together. And I think it's just because it's a very heartwarming story where you see that he was like a wild monkey.
Hmm.
And then during his explorations, Lord Mystic came and freed him. He would have died otherwise, and he freed him, and they become kind of these like best friend characters. So he's like the explorer who's very, very intelligent, clearly very rich as well, but he's got like a kindness to him, unlike some of the other characters that we see who maybe are less so. I just think they're a really cool pair, and I think they're very developed compared to some of the other members.
Yeah. Okay. What is your favorite SEA attraction or story that goes along with an attraction?
Mm-hmm. Um, I I think my favorite story is definitely Tower of Terror. That is so
Okay.
cool. Because they don't shy away from saying, if you mess with stuff you don't understand, if you don't respect the powers, then you're gonna literally die. So that's kind of very out there. So I really like that. Favorite attraction, I would probably say Mystic Manor, because that's one of my favorite rides on the entire earth. But I will say I still have a very soft, squishy spot for Fortress Explorations because I did not learn about the SEA from a YouTube video. I did not learn about it from a wiki. I learned about it from that site, and it like called out to me to want to know more. So I have a
Yeah.
big soft spot for it.
Um, all right, this next one is we asked your favorite character, but what existing character do you think you are or resemble the most or want to strive to become?
Mm-hmm. Ooh, I don't know, because part of me is like I'm such a collector, so I feel like I might be in that group with both Hightower and Mystic that collect, but I also really like Mary Oceaneer because I just think she's kind of like badass. She's like a female captain, and she's got this best friend that's a parrot. So again, this kind of connection with animals. So I don't know. I think I would, there's this part of me who is this scholar who sits around and writes every day and reads books, but I would love to be that person. I would love to be on the ship and just going around exploring things and finding new knowledge to share with the world in a different way than what you and I do every week.
Okay. All right. So then the next, taking that a step further, Disney calls you and says, we want to base an original character off of you. If you've ever thought about that, what would that character be?
Wow. Oh my gosh. Yeah, we gotta work on this because Disney's gonna come calling. So I do think that so many of these characters should be professors. So there are, ones that have been referred to as professor, but most of them aren't. So I would love to see someone who's kind of doing the indie thing on the side, being a professor and not just an explorer. And I would say the other thing I'd love to see developed more, because most of what we see is the exploration and the discovery, but I also think there's a lot with creativity. So something that maybe relates even more strongly to the art and music side would really be
Hmm.
something I would want to add to the character, because I'm from a musical background and I don't see enough. There is some good music and some of the attractions that are based on the SCA, but there isn't a lot with music, and it's just like Mystic Manor is all about a magic music box. Where's the music professor? Where's the person who's
Yeah.
developing that kind of creative side of exploration and discovery? So I need to go write a book about this. Hold on.
So off of that, there is a character that showed up in the parks. The character is no longer really in the parks, but his imaginative friend is still in the parks. They have made a Marvel Comics series about him. He existed around that time. Um, do you think, I mean, with all the popularity of Figment, do you think they will ever I can't remember what his name in the comic was other than Dreamfinder, what his given name was.
Yeah, those are pretty good comics too. I really
Oh
like
yeah,
them.
they're fun. Would do you think he would ever become an SEA member and kind of reintroduced, probably in the steampunk fashion of the comics, not the original, because the steampunk faction, or that kind of iteration, looks very exploratory and everything.
Mhm.
Do you ever see that happening? Maybe with the reinvention of the Imagination Pavilion, whatever that is.
Yeah, no, you're totally onto something. So first of all, steampunk is definitely a style that was derived from the Victorian era. So there's so much steampunk in Jules Verne and things like that. And then everything that's copying the Victorian era that does steampunk. So very much that makes sense. And I thought that the comics are a lot more realistic than
Hmm.
the pavilion, which I saw more on that kind of fantastical, almost metaphorical side of, the what is the imagination, what are the different things. But I think about that the original ride, what about science, right?
Hmm.
And art and literature and music. And it's absolutely thinking about that. I think about his contraptions that he makes in, especially in the comics. You see that he does a lot of
Hmm.
this inventor kind of stuff. Yeah, I mean, I think he should be an SCA member, and I think that I'd love to see even a live action movie, as long as they made Figment cute still. That'd be very important to me. I would love to see that explored further, and that would also answer my question of why don't we see a little more of the art, the music, the
Yeah.
literature, the creative side, because I think that's there in the history of human discovery. So yeah, I think you figured this out. Disney, call this
The,
man.
they you know there is a movie in development. Who knows?
Yeah, I've
Because of
heard
the
that, but I
popularity
wonder
of,
if it's going to be based on the comics, because I think it would be great.
yeah, I mean, and who knows? Maybe there's an end credit scene where that is the launch. Maybe the live action Figment movie is the launch of kind of people's exposure to SEA. Maybe they're going to have a post credit scene, much like they did when Nick Fury showed up in the first Iron Man, to launch the MCU. Maybe that's going to happen. The last thing,
Maybe.
the last thing I think would be interesting. I asked you about an original SEA character. So, an original SEA story. Here's here's kind of the parameters that you mentioned, and I mentioned, like, uh, professors or everyday people who are they're tasked with finding out this information. They're finding, with linking things together, with researching writing, with showing creativity, with all different types of ways of solving problems. If if Disney asked for an original story to kind of bring everybody into this fold, um, what would be your 20-second plot of that movie to kind of introduce everybody into it, and at the end make it seem like, hey, I'm part of this. Like what I do in my daily life, I am part of this SEA society or group.
Awesome. Yeah, I don't know exactly what the plot would be, but I know that it would connect to a World Expo. Because I think about Timekeeper already has this, I think about even, American Adventure and, talking about the inventions from an expo and thinking about Stark, the Iron Man attraction at Hong Kong Disneyland, which is an expo. So this idea of the expo, which Epcot was based on, right? Epcot
Mhm.
is basically a permanent World's Fair where it has the technological side and then the all nations kind of idea. So I would love something where you go to just a normal World Expo, which happens. I just went to the Dubai Expo a couple of years ago, and then somehow that ends up being a portal to something. So I also got vibes a little bit in my head of Tomorrowland, if you've seen
Mhm.
that movie. But I think these expos are the site of so much creativity, so much scientific discovery, so much exploration, that it would be fun, especially since Timekeeper has been closed for so long, to just see some connection where something important is going on there. So I don't know what's going to happen there, but that's where we're going to meet some of these SEA members, and they're going to figure out what's going on.
Yeah.
Maybe it's the Hightower Corporation. They're trying to, invade the expo somehow,
Yeah.
and maybe we the guests have to stop them.
Yeah, that's really, really cool. I really, really like that. And actually, you mentioned Tomorrowland. When I was talking about that question, that movie popped into my head. That, because of the stories and kind of the lessons that movie has. Such a great movie and such a great story to it. So, all right, Dr. Baker, thank you so much for this. I feel like I have learned a lot about SEA. And I feel like I now, it's that old saying that the more you learn, the more you know how much you need to learn, or the more you know how much you don't know. I need to go and I need to read a lot more about this. I need to visit parks. I need to be looking at the different connections at the different parks. And any future trips, I need to consult with you beforehand so I know the next time I'm in Disneyland eating a Dole Whip, um, what I need to be looking for. Because when you said that, I don't know, maybe this is revisionist history on my part. I I thought I remembered pointing something out like, hey, look, he here's names that like you've heard of some of these names to the boys. Again, that could just be me like having revisionist history about it. Um, but
Yeah, and I think by the way, at this expo movie slash ride, I definitely think Dreamfinder is going to be there. So just to, tie it all together.
yeah,
And
yeah,
I'm still interested if Disney's going to tell us some of who these other members are. So just one last example is there's somebody named Blauerhimmel. I think this might be a professor. I've saw them in the book. I've seen them in that Tropical Hideaway. There's a picture of them in the Mystic Manor queue. Who is this person? I need
yeah.
to know. So are these our future attraction seeds? Is
Yeah.
that what those people are? Those extras that we haven't quite seen yet?
And it's just so cool that they are able to do this. And again, it's the fandom existing on so many levels. If you go and you just want to experience the parks for what it is, you can do that. If you go and you want to make all these connections, you can do that as well. So it's really, really cool. For anybody, last thing for anybody who wants to connect with you, ask more questions, how can they do that?
Yeah, so you can reach me by email, which is just my name, Carissa Baker at ucf.edu, or you can reach me on LinkedIn. I'm very active on LinkedIn.
All right. Thank you so much for this. This was a lot of fun. Have a great rest of the day.
All right, bye bye.